So, Doc, you got to tell me these electrode dots that you have on the athletes that you're analyzing the biometrics of or biomechanics of. I saw a video of you on YouTube. I see this character, which is like a almost like a Tron version of an athlete, a pro athlete. Then I see these things stuck all over their body. And I'm like, I got to know this guy. Who is this guy? This is amazing. What exactly am I looking at when I look at a video of this happening? What do you do and what's happening here?
Yeah, so these little electrodes, as you want to call them, are just actually small little spheres of reflective material. And this material is the same type of substance that we would have on like a runner stripe if we're running at night so that cars can see us. And so we have special motion capture cameras that are designed to only see these specific reflective materials. And so these dots are placed all over an athlete's body at very specific locations regarding their anatomy. And so looking at like where their elbow joint is, their ankle joint, their knee, etc. And so these dots then turn athletes into stick figures, which allows biomechanists like myself and others to examine their movement extremely accurately via a series of joint angles and angular velocities. And so it essentially takes the guesswork out of understanding how we move as athletes and gives us factual data-driven evidence behind the decision-making that any athletes or coaches make.
I love it. And I love data driven. I'm kind of a little bit of a geek. Even like with my website, I have like a panel that comes up with all the information. I love it. Guys, we're here with Tyler Hammer, and he's a biomechanist. Have you ever listened to a podcast with a biomechanist? If you have not, this is your opportunity. It might be the only opportunity you ever get. So back to what you just said. So data is interesting. So talk to me, let's break things down a bit. Talk to me about the data you're acquiring. Let's start there and then we can move into what you do with it. But what's the actual data look like? Because we have a lot of people that have been on this podcast that race cars. And so their data is very difficult because it's a lot of like curves and it doesn't, sometimes it's hard to get some clarity and put your hands around it and wrap yourself around it to understand it. What does this data look like? What does it tell us? And maybe move into what do we do with it?
Yeah. So, like I said, like you could apply what I do to any movement, specifically like any sport. And so for taking like free throw in basketball, for example, say I have, Shaquille O'Neal, who's, previously had trouble with the free throw, marked up, and we're going through a biomechanics assessment. He performs a free throw, and the data we get is essentially a series of graphs. And so these graphs are what's called a time series. So you have the start from when he's, first setting up to do that free throw, and then he goes through the motion. And so we have this data going through the whole entire process. And so from there, I'm able to see, okay, well, what's the degree of his wrist flexion and extension? What's like, how much is he bending his knee? What's his torso angle? Is he lean back? Is he lean forward too much? And so I can kind of go through that and then see, okay, if this checks out and this checks out, and then we kind of see that he's doing something different here that might affect his performance. That's where we kind of hone in on that. Okay, how do we fix that? How do we how does that influence everything else happening within this motion? Same goes for baseball pitching, where I can see how well are we rotating our hips, rotating our trunk. What does our arm action look like down to the millisecond? And so from there, I see how does every body segment interplay with one another and affect the overall movement, which then obviously influences our outcome. So it's all about not only increasing our performance, but a lot of what we do also helps to understand how we can prevent injury in athletes as well.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So that's really interesting. I did not know that you could use this tool to prevent injuries.
Yeah.
Is there a benchmark? Because obviously you have to recognize, if you see what's happening, you have to recognize where the lines are being crossed and what the boundaries are. So are there biometrics for athletes in a database that exist for an athlete who's been injury free for an extended period of time? Or is there an algorithm that already can determine, is smart enough to know that, hey, this is the optimal amount of rotation for hips or optimal whatever metric it is, whatever I call it, a KPI on, whatever
Yeah.
metric it is. Does it already, does an algorithm already exist, or how are we defining this? How are we knowing if we're there?
Yeah, so we technically don't rely on algorithms very much because as athletes, we're all individualistic. And so a common example I like to give is in baseball. So at the professional level, at the MLB level, a majority of our pitchers are throwing the same speed, somewhere between low to high 90s, but they're all doing it differently. No one's throwing the exact same. No one has cookie cutter mechanics from one to the other. And so it's understanding, okay, you could have a normative value of, what does every single pitcher we've looked at who's thrown 90 plus miles per hour, what do they look like? That's great to, I guess, judge what we're looking at with a current athlete. But ultimately, I need to figure out what are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? The higher up you go, the greater athletes are at compensating. And so I can have an athlete do something very wrong, but then do something very right and still have the same outcome as someone who's doing like, by the book. And so it's just a matter of understanding, well, what's the normative value look like? And then also making sure that we are staying within the athletes, keeping them who they are, keeping that individualistic aspect of their performance as well.
Yeah. And so what does that discussion look like? I mean, because I think it's interesting because you have some benchmarks on what the ideal is. You have ideas of what your current athlete is doing. And, at that level, at the MLB level, I mean, 1% means something. Gaining these incremental gains are important. Is it a matter of you sitting down with an athlete and saying, "Hey, here's your data. Here's another athlete. Here are the metrics." Like maybe, I mean, where my mind is going is two videos next to each other, left and right, and then the biometric data that you have beneath it. And then it's exploring it and saying, "Hey, this is a place we could be curious about exploring. Maybe not so much you need to do this," which no one likes to be told what to do, or at least I don't. I know when my girlfriend tells me what to do or my wife tells me what to do, it doesn't go over so well. But people don't like being told what to do. So maybe if you invite just the topic up and explore it, is it more of an exploration than like a conclusion?
Yeah. So, and that's a great question because sometimes people come to me or just biomechanists in general, just like a checkup, like, hey, like here's my movement. How does it look? I don't really have any questions that I've answered. Other times, people come to you with really specific questions, like, hey, like my performance has been down for the past month or two. Like, what is going on? And so, going through, sifting through the data and exploring it, and then sitting down with the athlete, the coaching staff, any other relevant personnel, whether it's your strength and conditioning coach, your ATs, PTs, whomever is on board with helping this athlete. The more people, the better, because we can formulate a plan of, okay, if this is like the first route to success, I've now identified, like, is this something that we are interested in taking? Here are the pros and cons of like addressing how much bend your knee if you're shooting a free throw, or addressing your arm action if you're a pitcher, or how you load if you're a baseball hitter. And then being like, if the athlete is okay with that, then yeah, that's great. And so now we formulate, what do we do with all this data? So yes, we've identified the problem, but how do we go about making this actionable is another thing. And so if an athlete's like, like I want to leave this part of me alone, then that's just okay. Going back to the drawing board and being like, well, we're seeing this, this, and this, which may also have a similar effect. Like, what's your opinion on if we take this route instead? And so a lot of this is helping to guide the player and coaching kind of the development route. It's just through a biomechanist data. It's just giving them numbers. Here's a tool that players and coaches can use.
Yeah, and what's interesting, and I just heard something that really resonated with me that you said, which is my job as a mental performance coach. A lot of times, my for lack of a better term, like the enemy that I'm fighting against within the minds and thoughts of athletes is uncertainty, fear of the unknown, and then the uncertainty that comes with it. And so, where a lot of athletes that I work with can run into trouble is when there's uncertainty, and that uncertainty might look like, well, I just don't know what to do, or I just don't know what to change. I don't know what I should focus on. And so I think what's interesting is it almost is starting to feel like to me that this is also a great tool for managing the fear of the unknown and uncertainty, and giving people a place to look. Is it not?
Yeah, and it provides like clarity. A lot of times, if I have an athlete who's come to me with chronic injury, like, hey, I have no idea what's going on. Being able to go through this assessment, collect the data, and objectively be like, okay, here's what is going on. It almost helps ease that load on that they're feeling, that burden of like, I have no idea what's going on. This endless spiral of I'm always in pain. My performance is suffering. I'm starting to lose my my will to like perform, like do what I love. That's what the nice thing about this really is, just being able to have that data driven evidence. But you can have, as some people like to point out, paralysis by analysis, where too much data can be a bad thing. But ultimately, I've yet to really see that, and a lot of people are just extremely thankful for the chance, the opportunity to be like, okay, yes, here's what I've been thinking is the problem. Now I know what's actually the problem, and so now I know how to address it.
Now, so how granular? So I'm imagining like a picture, and then I'm imagining in my mind that there's certain wrist, like maybe elbow to wrist movements that will put the action on the ball, right? So there's the overall movement of the body for the maybe the speed component, but then
Mhm.
at the end, it's that little flick and that little wrist, elbow to wrist maybe action that is what puts the spin on the ball and puts that finishing touch on it. Can you how detailed can you get? Because when I look at some of the videos of you doing your work, there's electrodes. If I had to guess, I mean, you tell me, you're the expert, but maybe let's just say 6 inches to a foot apart. But with a hand, if you really want to get to the level where you're seeing what each of the fingers doing, does the technology allow for that, or has it not evolved to that point yet?
I would say the technology is definitely allowed for it. And when it comes to something as small scale as the hand, we typically have for bigger objects. So say like if you're doing like horse biomechanics, the markers that we call them, the deflective materials that we put on the body, can probably like this big. They're very big because there's a lot of surface area on these horses. So you can just slap them on that thigh, and cameras can see it from a greater distance. With humans, it's probably more of like I'll call it like nickel to dime size, that we're just putting on like the shoulders, elbows, wherever. When it comes to the hands, they're a lot smaller, and so they're teeny tiny little dots. We probably put on like the fingers. You can do the joints, things like that, and so that boils down to how close the cameras are to be able to see these things. Because obviously, the farther away they are, just like us as humans, the harder it is for us to see. And so, if we have cameras that are able to be up on these markers to see what the hand's doing, we're able to get extremely accurate data down to the millimeter of accuracy. And so it's kind of that trade-off with, okay, are we more concerned about the hand, or are we more concerned about the more broad movement of the athlete?
Interesting. So yeah, I love that. And that's wild because the fact that you can get that granular, it's like, I mean, you even think about something as wild as like, oh God, my brain's going like 1,000 miles a minute and all these different ways to make money with this technology and to help people out with it. I mean, part of me is imagining. All right, so I'm going to get a little wild here. So tell me if I need to tap the brakes on this one. So what I'm imagining is I want to learn how to. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. I want to learn how to play violin. So you use your technology to record a song being played in its totality by a violinist. And I happen to have a glove that I wear that has an amount of action that it can create. And so what it does is it can mimic and match the movements that you're recording from the famous violinist, and then the infamous violinist myself puts on this glove, and then the technology just can almost kind of guide or initiate some sort of action with my fingers to help maybe make it easier. I mean, am I getting too creative here, or is there a way that, or does something like this exist?
I don't know if something like that exists yet, but I mean, with judging off of how much we're advancing, just from a regular school of thought, with how much AI is now just rocketing our processes, to essentially just even how biomechanics is evolving in the past decade itself, I wouldn't be surprised if that is a thing sometime, in the next couple of decades. Yeah, I could definitely see where you're coming from. Is you have this time series of data, you can see, the wrist movement, the finger movement, elbow movement, shoulder, whatever it may be, and then some sort of coding algorithm in the back end that essentially just takes this and having some sort of exoskeleton or something like that, which helps essentially influence how the arm's moving in a fashion. I've seen this in golf where you can, it's this massive machine that you can mimic the golf swing of famous golfers. It's like this, like, I don't know how to describe it, like big circle where you have nowhere to go with your club, but essentially mimicking the path. So it's kind of like the club's in between like some rails, I think, or something like that. I don't know. Something I just briefly
Wow.
see, don't quote me on it, but it looks really cool. Scrolling through Twitter, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we had your idea come to fruition sometime in the next couple decades. Like I said,
Oh yeah, it's wild. I mean, because technology, it's just, and because it's like a race, like
yeah.
it's and here I am. If I'm a podcast interviewer and my mind's already here, you can only imagine where your mind and your colleague's mind, your competition mind is already gone. Especially maybe halfway deep into a bottle of a good Merlot. It's like, wow, the creativity is endless.
Yeah.
Let's master the belly flop here. But no, so it's interesting that. So let me ask you this then, and maybe this is a less creative and a little bit closer idea, but along that same path that we just went down, is there a way to have like biofeedback come in and let me know that, hey, my hip rotation on my left side is going, let's say, 5% out of deviation from the norm, right? And so now all of a sudden I feel like a little buzz or a little warmth or whatever the feedback is. Does something like that exist? Because I would think that that would be relatively simplistic.
Yeah, something like that does exist. Different modalities of that same principle exist. And so, what I've seen personally come out of our department, our lab, is looking at just squatting asymmetry. So, if we're to be on force plates, which are these essentially platforms that measure how much force we're exerting. So, if you remember back in physics class, if everyone was asleep or awake during it, one of Newton's laws was for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so, these force plates are designed to measure how much force or pressure we're exerting down on them. We can also see the direction of that force. If I'm leaning on my big toes, if I'm leaning back on my heels, we'll be able to see that. And so one of these studies looking at essentially the asymmetry of how we squat, this body weight squatting, where we're standing up on these force platforms and we're squatting down. We have real-time feedback in front of us of this kind of just waving bar like this. And if you are, if you have symmetry between the limbs, the bar is kind of in this green region where if you're trying to lean one side, the bar will then go up like this to kind of show you, okay, whoa, you're leaning to the left or you're leaning to the right. And so you have visual feedback, you have auditory feedback where you hear beeps. You have, haptic feedback where you, like you said, if you have like a little bit of a buzz on your side that says like, hey, like you're leaning more towards this side. These things are currently being studied in terms of their effectiveness and how we also translate that into, in the sports realm, athletic performance.
Wow. It's so wild. Now, where did this technology, what sport kind of took the lead on this technology? Was it you guys in baseball, or was it, I know golf is a very painful sport for many. Was it golf or was it baseball or elsewhere?
I would definitely say golf and baseball, the top two, in my opinion. Golf really kind of took to it and was one, in my opinion, who started to really look at technology in terms of helping performance. And then baseball out of nowhere just took it and ran with it. But baseball is blazing a frontier where it's like everyone is in an arms race, not only at the professional level, but in the college level as well. And even some private sector places as well, just getting different pieces of tech, whether it's a biomechanics lab or looking at, spin, trajectory of, golf balls, baseballs, things like that. And then we even see the trickle down effect into basketball, where basketball is now really starting to look into biomechanics and motion capture as well. And they already have previous, I guess, similar technologies in place where basketball has force plates, trying to look at like ball tracking, workload monitoring, where they're following athletes' athletic movement throughout a game, a practice, things like that.
Wow. So I looked at some images. So maybe kind of walk me through this. So what I'm imagining is that if I'm in your, I was going to call it studio, whatever the term is for the environment where all the technology exists. How far? Because it appeared to me from what I saw, and I don't know if this is just the structure of the room, that there were some receptors, for lack of a better term, but there was technology that went up and above, almost like a frame, like the frame of a house around the athletes, but not too claustrophobic or cumbersome. Does that frame need to exist on like a court? Like, let's say we were going to do like a basketball game. Like, is the technology too cumbersome to follow a player throughout an entire game or practice?
No, and it depends on kind of what you are interested in. And so what you're referring to was all of our motion capture cameras. And so these are just specific cameras that are up on a truss that we kind of have out of the way. So athletes aren't worrying about, hitting this or this technology is in the way, like cables, things like that. And so you can have a series of cameras in a very large space. You see it in the movie industry, which actually drives a lot of motion capture. If you look at Avatar behind the scenes has like hundreds of cameras surrounding this massive pool where they're doing motion capture. But for the sake of baseball specifically, we have it around a pitching mound, around a batter's box, which is much smaller. And so we have 20 cameras around our pitching mound. But if you want to take this, put it on a basketball court, you can do the same thing, or you can do GPS monitoring, where athletes are wearing small IMUs, which are essentially just the same thing as like our phone's athletic or activity monitor, where it's able to see kind of how many steps you've taken, but to a much more accurate degree. And so hockey uses it, soccer uses it, basketball, baseball, softball. It's just looking at athlete load monitoring. So what's the distance these athletes are moving over the course of a practice or a game? What are their sprint intervals looking like? How far are they sprinting, and how long are they sprinting for from a duration standpoint? How much time are they standing still? Are they walking? And so we're able to see kind of, when are you tiring out? When, like, do you need more sprint work in like the fourth quarter? Because, maybe if you're in hockey, you're giving up more goals in like the third period. Different things like that just help also guide from a biomechanist standpoint, like the workload monitoring. It doesn't have to just be in a motion capture lab. It can also be out on the field where it all really matters through like GPS tracking.
Wow. It's just beyond wild. Now, let's take a step back from the technology for a second. I know it sounds like you were at, because you're a doctor, would love to hear exactly what your doctorate is in. And then also you're at University of Omaha. Now you're working for the Mets.
Yeah.
Tell me more about like the connection between all that. Like, and also also the other piece I'm curious about is this new technology to the Mets, or are you bringing in a refinement to pre-existing technologies similar to this?
Yeah. So it's kind of to backtrack. I can give you kind of the whole lay of the land, a bit the bigger story. When I first graduated college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be going to physical therapy, but I spent 2 years kind of getting waitlisted for PT programs. It's really competitive stuff, and so I ended up just going to a generic health and kinesiology program here at the University of Nebraska Omaha. And from there, I got paired with my faculty advisor, Dr. Brian Nahr, from just like a general like semester project. And I don't really know what biomechanics was, but he offered, like, hey, you should volunteer my research team. So I did that, and then thought it was pretty cool. And then before you know it, he offered me money as a graduate assistant, research assistant, which made significantly more than me scrubbing tables at a PT clinic. And so I was like, yeah, I'll take it. Still didn't know what biomechanics was. And so I ended up graduating with my master's degree. And then I remember sitting in his office right before graduation, trying to figure out, okay, do I go into the real world, or do I continue to pursue my PhD? And if I do so, what does that look like? And so it boiled down to, well, if you get your PhD, it needs to be something that you're extremely passionate in, because you essentially pigeonhole yourself with that work. And so I played baseball throughout college, and pitching was a lot of who I was and who I am now. And so I was like, hey, like, can we do like pitching biomechanics? Our department never really did any sports biomechanics before. We were all very clinically focused, looking at stroke biomechanics, prosthetics, individuals with COPD, so on and so on. And so it was a big leap of faith for us to really go into the sports realm, because we'd never done it before. We didn't know anything about it. And so we dusted off some old cameras in a room that wasn't being used anymore and repurposed them for pitching. Got on board with our baseball team here at the University of Nebraska Omaha, talked to the coaching staff. They're like, yeah, let's do this. So then we started bringing guys in, And before you know it, we get a lot of hubbub throughout the Omaha community. Hey, this stuff's really cool. Like, can I get my son an eval? And so we opened this to the community as like a pay per service. For now, we've gotten, gosh, hundreds of guys since we opened, probably about August 2020. Hundreds of guys. I think our youngest has been 7. Our oldest has been individual who, I guess, as of last year was on an MLB roster. Now he's a free agent. And then guys coming from all over the Midwest. I think our farthest east grasp has been Indiana. Southern's been Texas, and kind of just that nice little stash in the Midwest has been our clientele. And so, as far as my relationship to the Mets now, biomechanics isn't exactly new to the Mets, but we are kind of bringing me in to help build out a lot of we're building a new lab and different things like that to kind of refurbish what we have already had in place and making it essentially top tier. I always thought it'd be pretty hard to get me out of UNO and the UNO pitching lab because it was my baby. It was my child I essentially fostered up through my PhD dissertation. And I've always been fortunate that my PhD dissertation was like essentially building a business. And so the Mets, the personnel is fantastic. I love who I work with from just a behind the scenes development standpoint to also like the coaching staff from top to bottom. Phenomenal. I love who I work with, and the facilities and the technology and just our mindset is something I've never seen before. And so that was something that got me to think like, okay, like I should probably uproot my family from Omaha and go to Florida where I'll be living down in their spring training complex. And so I'll be bringing some new things, but for the most part, we're just expanding upon a lot of the heavy lifting that previous individuals have done.
Wow. So you're right now in Florida, set up to use the technology that exists already in spring training. Is that what's happening?
So essentially,
not spring training, but why did I call it spring training? Or
people call it like the spring training facility. And so a lot of player development, whether it's like actual development or if someone gets hurt, they go down to that team's spring training facility. And so spring training facilities are either located in Florida or they're in like the Phoenix area. And so while our biomechanics lab is centralized in the spring training facility in Port St. Lucie, a lot of the operation can go up the coast to all the other affiliates because there's there's high A, there's double A, triple A, you have the major league team, which is the Mets, all up and down the coast. And so you're spending time not only at the headquarters down in Florida, but also going to different teams, checking in, talking to coaching staffs, just different things like that.
So is this like a mobile unit or you fly them down to you? It's not that mobile.
So it's not that mobile, be flying down to me. And so whether it's at the end of the season where everyone comes down and sees us, or if an individual wants to biomechanics support to answer a question like, hey, like I'm not hitting the way I was last season as I am right now. Like I got to figure out what's going on and be quick. Like they can come down and do it. And so that's kind of the premise of it, just being able to have a centralized location at our headquarters to have this. And then also offering more of if we need to, a more simplistic evaluation, which through GPS tracking, which is much more portable that we can bring to affiliates.
Wow. So if like, let's say for example, you're doing a session, you're doing an assessment, and we're looking at the athlete's body from their right side. So we're to their right. They're facing straight ahead. We look, and then we say, oh, wow, we thought this is the angle we want to look at, but I'd like to see how this looks on the other side of their body or from behind or from above. Is this like a 3D axis that you could rotate or no?
Yeah, this is probably a really crucial detail I should have put way earlier is, so the purpose of all these markers is it essentially creates like a 3D skeleton, like a 3D model. So you can manipulate the entire area and like look at their movement in a 3D axis. So it's not so much looking at someone from just like a video. It's like I could look at you from the top down, like you from the left, right, like underneath of you. Like it's all right there. They're essentially a model that's floating, and I can manipulate them in space and see exactly what's going on.
I want one of these things. What are you allowed to talk about how much one of these costs? I mean, what does a machine like this cost? I mean, I like to have goals in my life, and I just want one for the house.
Yeah, so it's It's kind of like cars, and so you can get like your base model car, and you can also get like a really really nice car. And so the higher up you get, obviously the more accurate and kind of gold standard the data is. And so I like to put it as like you can get biomechanics is now going into like everyone's hands via like a smartphone. So you can take a smartphone and record your movement and get biomechanics data through just an algorithm. And yeah, it's pretty accurate, but it's not the most accurate. And so a step up would be a two camera system, where I have an iPhone and another iPhone. And I'm doing the same thing, taking videos where it's like maybe it's from dead on and then once another angled over to the side. More accurate, but not the most accurate. And so if you go all the way up, you get it's kind of what I use now, where it's like the marker-based motion capture or markerless motion capture through a very high-tech device. That's going to be, depending on how many cameras you get, if you get like 10 cameras, that's going to be running up there, couple 100,000 at least, because you're paying for all the cameras, the cables. Software is a lot. Professionals will come in from these companies to aim your camera, set up your lab, make it as most plug and play for you as possible. So to get something as gold standards high tech is what I use. It's extremely expensive, which is why we don't see a lot of these, because it takes so much money, so much effort to run these types of labs. And so you typically see the more accessible iPhone or just kind of smartphone biomechanics evaluations being used more widely, because you're only paying for the software. You already have your iPhone and you're able to get some data fairly easily.
Wow. So your machine could be what, upwards to a 500,000 or closer to 1,000,000, the one you use?
I think in our small, like if we have like our little turf area around our pitching mound and around our batter's box, you're looking at like, gosh, yeah, it's probably coming up on. I couldn't even tell you the exact quote. Probably I'd say like 500,000 at least.
Wow. And then, so one place that I want to go back to that you mentioned, and I did see it in one of the videos, was at the top of the mound, there was that foot plate, I believe you called it, a foot plate.
Force plate.
Okay, yep. And so with that plate, does it have enough pressure sensors where, I mean, it can get really granular? I mean, you had even stated to the point where it can tell like maybe how flat your foot is. And could it tell like if the outer edge of my foot, or let's say my heel, is starting to lift, it can actually in real time start to see that pressure change? Is it not so much visually, but from like a pressure reading, right?
Yeah, and so you can examine the force from two different visuals. The first being just a graph, and so you can have a graph where you can have it in any three directions. So you can have it up like this. You can have it going this way or forward as well. There's obviously 3D movement. We can move in three planes, and so if you have all three graphs going, say that I am just purely pushing more force down on my foot, that graph would skyrocket because we're putting more force down. You can also look at your center of pressure. So if you have like if my hand is my foot, like an image of it, and your center of pressure is right here, you can have real time movement where if you rock back on your heel, it can now go back this way. You can have it up by your toes, so on and so forth. And then another visual is, and this is more commonly seen in motion captures, is an arrow. And so you have this big arrow that shoots up from the ground where your center of pressure is. And so if my foot kind of goes towards my toes, this arrow is going to start going towards the toes like this. It can also go this way, meaning that I'm leaning, even though my pressure's on my toes, I'm leaning forward, the arrow will start to go this way in that direction. With more force I'm exerting, the arrow gets higher. And so it's essentially this kind of really cool way of seeing really quickly how much force they're exerting and also the direction of that force.
Wow. So
I know there's a lot.
No, it's so, I'm overwhelmed trying to figure out not so much how to understand the technology, but more so where to find 500 grand. So when it comes to using this technology, are you like, maybe give me a little idea of what a day looks like? Because, obviously gathering data is time consuming. So my guess is that that's a time sink where to optimize your funnel of efficiency, having someone set up the athletes other than you would be ideal in a perfect world. Collecting the data would also be great, but then you would come in, especially with your expertise. I mean, I can't imagine that there's a ton uh, of people that did well, performed well in college at a great college for baseball, performed well, were a pitcher and they're a biomechanist. I mean, I would assume, not to diss your colleagues, but I would assume most of them, have multiple gaming systems at the house, probably love their Doritos, and probably canceled their gym membership 10, 20 years ago. I know you're not supposed to judge in modern day culture, but I have a feeling I just did. It seems like you're kind of like a unique anomaly. I mean, did I completely misrepresent the community? Because it seems like the PhD geek friends I have, they don't have trophies on their wall from their success in baseball.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I definitely, me being a ex Division 1 baseball pitcher, I do have that background where I can walk the walk and talk the talk. But a lot of times, especially at the MLB level or just sports science level in general, it's just people who, whether they played up until high school or just have an extreme infatuation with sports in general, just know a lot, who are just engineers. And so while I don't have that next step of performing at the college level or the pro level, they still have somewhat of a background where they've been playing baseball their whole life. They might have followed baseball, or still follow baseball very closely, and can provide that. A lot of biomechanists are essentially engineers who are able to apply that engineering focus to how we move as humans.
Wow. Love it. And so are you communicating more so with the players themselves or with the coaches? I mean, what seems to take most of your time?
It's a mix, and that's because spending time with coaches, being like, okay, well, what do we want to know with all this stuff? Like, what ideas have come to you while you're out at the field, watching these guys? Maybe like, oh, like I want to see like this, and this, and so okay, yeah, like here's a way we could do that, or like let's consider looking at it this way. And so talking with coaches that way, but then also when players are actually being evaluated, I spend a lot of time talking to the players themselves. They're in the lab, they're throwing, they're hitting. Hey, like consider this, consider that. And just kind of letting them be loose and be themselves. I don't want people being robotic and hesitant just because they have all these markers on them, or if we're doing markerless motion capture, which is a whole monster in of itself, just kind of being scared and hesitant. I want them being themselves because I want the data we collect in this lab to be representative of the data we collect while they're in the game. And when they're in the game, it's adrenaline, it's competitiveness, it's I want to succeed. Where the stakes aren't as high in the lab because it's just a lab, and so making sure that these people are themselves and getting the most out of them, the most representative data, is another huge part of what I do.
Interesting. I think that's super powerful because if you can, where my head just went. Have you guys experimented with using VR technology to at least get a match visually? Because we know that the visual system gives so much information. What if they were in a headset and we're throwing at a target in virtual reality? That would kind of increase the odds of them trying to have a pattern match between imagination and reality. Has that been played with yet?
So I know that VR is bigger in a hitting realm, because it's hard to emulate different pitchers who do different pitch types. From pitching, I can see that being a little bit trickier because just me envisioning, okay, if I had a VR headset on and I'm supposed to like throw, I'd feel kind of out of sorts because like I can't specifically see the target in front of me in like real time because I'm looking at this headset on. Where I feel like if I just had the VR set off and I have that same competitive feeling, the adrenaline's pumping, and I'm throwing to a target, I'd be able to, I guess, get more representative data that way. And so, kind of just to bring it whole circle, I think that VR definitely has a space in hitting, but pitching right now, if we are to use it, I think we just need to figure out how we plan on using it and what outcomes we expect to find by doing so.
Yeah, exactly. No, I could see that. That makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, what do you do to try to replicate the high pressure situation? I mean, do you try to maybe have them, instead of just throwing the ball for the sake of throwing the ball, do you have maybe a target that they're aiming at or throwing at that could also be a measurement of their success? So they can also get some feedback, not just from the data that you're acquiring from their body movements, but maybe even like a score on like, hey, aim for sector one, right? And let's say like a little green light comes on. He aims for sector one in the pitcher's strike box, and we can get an accuracy rating on that. So then we also have a front end biomechanics evaluation, and then the actual back end evaluation of what the output was.
Yeah. So you're 100% right, and that's kind of the idea you had is a very gross and easy way to do it. And so there's a thing called a nine pocket. It's a target that is essentially 3 rows of 3. So the nine pocket is just 9 holes. And so they're each essentially a square, a sector where you can be, okay, aim for, if you have them labeled, like aim for like pocket 1, which is like top left. And then as you go like 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth, you can do that. People are starting to develop a more nuanced approach to this, where it's actually like measuring, okay, if this is what you're aiming for and this is where you miss, this is how, like, the distance you've actually missed, and you can do it that way. When your first question is like, okay, well, how do you actually like get these guys to like, emulate that like competition? My first thought, which is my favorite, music. What do you want to listen to? Blast it, be yourself, be in your zone, because essentially the batter's box and the pitcher's mound is your office. That's where you make your money. And so just be you and vibe, right? And just let that thing rip, let it eat, and let's get better. It doesn't have to be like, it's not, this isn't a test where it's like it's your semester final, and if you fail, like you fail. It's like, okay, well, if this isn't your best day, we can still use that. Like, why isn't this your best day? What is different?
I love it. So are you, if someone's coming in, I mean, so there obviously there's the initial assessment, and then there's an exploration and a curiosity phase, like a discovery phase, like what can we discover with this information? And then there's a let me go out and practice for X amount of time and then come back and see what's changed. What is that? What is the actual process from assessment to I'm going out to work on things and then I return? What is there a process for that? Or once again, is it so individualized for each player? There really isn't a specific process and time frame for that.
So there is a process, but it's very individualized. And so it's, guy comes in, they do if it's their baseline motion capture assessment, they do it. We identify, okay, based on the data, we need to work on X, Y, and Z. And then there's drill work or just different coaching modalities that help address these things. And so they go out and practice, and they're with coaching staffs who are also aware of, what their practice plan is, and they're working on these things. We prescribe like the sets, reps, drills, weights, everything you need to do. And so it's just plug and play from there. They go out, they do it, and then they come back, whether it's a month later, 2 months later, whatever it may be, based on their schedule, and we reassess. Did that work? Did that not work? Humans are really interesting because I could give you an external cue, and you're like, "Yep, got it," and it just clicks. Or I could give you something that's worked for someone else, and you're just like, I got nothing, and just keep going through the Rolodex of like, okay, like what can I tell you that's trying to get you the same outcome that I want you to get, but like, in a way that you understand it, whether it's external cue or setting yourself up to at the start of a drill, like in a position that allows you to succeed and influences like that proper movement pattern. It's just, that's the kind of fun thing with human, just how we learn, is understanding the individual. Okay, if you're really responsive to this cue, let's roll with it. But if you're not, I got to figure out how you learn really quickly and try to figure out, okay, if this is, if you're more of a do-it-yourself guy, like self-exploration, or if you just want to like keep going through cues, how do we get there type of thing.
Wow. It's amazing because you're right. How you say things, and there's a psychology component to this.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah.
there are so many. I want to do what you do now. I think I'm gonna send give notice to myself that I'm done. I want to come work with you, work for you, and get your knowledge. It's so fascinating. Another place that you've inspired me to go. Have you explored this? This is great, and thanks for coming on. Like I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah.
So you just brought me down a different road. Now all of a sudden you have an athlete teed up, queued up, taped up, ready to rock. Technology's on. Then instead of you giving him cues, you have the coach come in. Now all of a sudden what we can start to do is evaluate how are players reacting and responding in a physical nature to the commands that you're giving. Hey, Tony, I want you to put a little bit more rotation in your hips. Okay, well, is he rotating his hips? Is the command yielding the output, or is he not really rotating his hips too much, but he's kind of rotating his shoulders more so, and then his hips are going with it? You know what I mean? Have you experimented with that at all?
So similar to that, and this is kind of just not just with what I do specifically, but just from like a the baseball society holistically is we are trying to understand the drill works they're prescribing, like what exactly are they actually doing? Because previously it's like okay, well we believe these drills work based on just previous successes, where it may be. Now it's like okay, we have people in the lab markered up doing these drills because are we actually changing what we want to change? Are we seeing something different? And so that's kind of the big push now is solidifying that these drills are actually here to address what they address and not doing something that we think they're addressing, but actually doing something else.
Yeah, interesting. Because ultimately, when it's all said and done, people hire me in mental performance coaching for a result. They hire you in biomechanics to get a result, right? Like that's all anyone
Mm-hmm.
wants.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to lose weight. Even then, they don't even really want to lose weight. They want to feel confident. They want to feel sexy. They want, it's usually like a feeling based or some sort of specific outcome.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. Um, would love if you'd be open to it since perfect timing for me to ask this question that I had, which is maybe give me a couple case studies that you can share that illustrate maybe some of the outcomes you've experienced over the years as a result of the technology, like in maybe just a general case, or is there sort of maybe even some low hanging fruit that tends to be like the easy wins on this? Would love to hear like a little bit more of like the results and what they look like, what you find.
Yeah. I give you there's one like specific case that comes to mind that I'm thinking of, and this was a couple of years ago. I had a guy who came into me. This was when I was at UNL the pitching lab. He just finished his last game of his junior year, and so he calls me up and says, "Hey, like I have one more year to essentially make it happen. Like what do I do?" And I said, "Well, like if you want, let's spend the summer." Because he called me probably like late May. Let's spend the summer getting better instead of going out and just playing more innings. He said, "Yeah, let's do it." And so he ended up, that call was on a Friday, came to me on a Monday. We got him in the motion capture lab, figured out what the problem was, and then we spent the summer addressing that. Essentially mapped out every throw he made from that summer on. And he did the work on, if I remember correctly, getting into his backside more. So as a pitcher, essentially going to coil or hinge like you would like as a deadlift and kind of load your glute instead of your quad. And then he had to work on his hips were too close when he landed. I think his arm was late, a plethora of other things. And so we spent the summer addressing these things. Then he came back, and I believe just before the season started in late winter, we reassessed, said, okay, here's where you are. I think you look fantastic. Let's rock and roll this spring during the spring season. He has a spring season, does great. His velocity jumped about 5 miles per hour. He went from about high eights, low 90s guy to now he's at about mid 90s ish. He ended up getting picked up into the independent ball league, which is just a little bit. It's professional ball, but it's below like the MLB in a sense. And he's still continuing to do fantastic there, and he's reported for spring training with them. And so that's been a really fun story because he's a relationship I've really come to love over this time because we're in constant contact. And try to do it with a lot of my athletes is checking with them how was the season, or if I caught them after a certain game, like what do you think of this game? How did you do? Give me your thoughts on this. Just checking in because I don't ever want guys just to come in, see me, and then say, okay, like good luck, adios. Like I want to be there for people. I want to have an open door if they have questions. I want to make sure that if they need a life rep, I'm the guy to do so.
Wow, I love it. Yeah, so much jam packed so far. I love it. Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to get to know a little bit more of the man behind the fascinating technology. Like what? So
Yeah.
when you hop in your car and then you jet home, I mean, how do you are you turning off baseball and becoming a dad? Are you what's your day-to-day outside life look like? Because I find that a lot of times people that are as driven and motivated and achievers such as yourself, sometimes we forget where the light switch is to turn things off.
Which is me, yeah. So when I get home, I have a 2-year-old daughter and a brand new baby boy, and it's being a dad is a full-time job in and of itself. So I pretty much go from one full-time job to the next. And while I'm doing so, I've got, movies on, whether it's like a Disney movie on the TV for my daughter who needs just like a second to chill out and watch it. And I've got the Mets on an iPad. And so being able just to watch that, whether it's the Mets or the different affiliates, I've always got an eye on something. Just kind of, being involved, being aware of who's doing what from a competition standpoint, looking at stats, looking at different, like looking at my Twitter, which is essentially just another means I use to educate myself, following coaches, different research avenues, podcasts. I do that a lot. And then, in between, obviously being the best dad I can. Obviously, I'm not sitting there on my iPad all the time, but I at least got some sort of baseball on in the background while also playing, Barbies with my daughter, or, I might have a game on my phone with me as I'm going for a walk with my family and dogs, things like that.
Do you have one of those pink Corvettes for Ken and Barbie, or have you not gotten to the level of the pink Corvette yet?
So so Frozen's big in my house, and so we had a Frozen Jeep, which my wife wanted to replace with a Bronco because she drives a Bronco, so she wanted our daughter to match her. So don't tell my daughter, but I think she's getting that little motorized Bronco for Christmas.
I love it. Oh my God, that's so good. So I would love to hear kind of your thoughts on this. As a mental performance coach, I'm always looking for ways to improve the emotional management, the mental, the self awareness, and the mental toughness and resilience of my athletes. Um, what have you? Let's take you kind of outside of the studio and the mechanics of it all. What have you noticed personally? Because you've been around athletes since you were one, and now you're around professional athletes on a regular basis, and you've been around top level athletes for a while now. What do you feel is the difference between the really good athletes and like the great, like the ones that just are elite? What do you think are the differences from a mental performance standpoint?
Yeah. Honestly, it's just attention to detail is a big thing that comes to mind. It's just, I feel like the greats are really privy to the small things and doing the small things right. Whether that is, making sure they drink their water. If they need it, meditating, like that mental health aspect. Like if they are aware that they need assistance or help in some area, addressing that area, giving themselves time instead of someone who's just kind of just showing up and going through the motions. I feel that a lot of the times our best are doing the small things routinely. It's a part of who they are. It's a part of their day. And so that's something I admire and also try to essentially emulate in my everyday life.
I love it. And it really is, I think sometimes we even complicate it. I find myself, the better I am at doing what I do, the less I guide my athletes, the more I ask questions, and the more, like you said, it's the reps. With self awareness, it's very easy for me to say, "Hey, Tyler, let's talk about self awareness. Be self aware today. Here are the ways that you can do it. Here are the actions you can take. Here's what it looks like. Let's touch base later today." But the reality is doing it once. I mean, I can tell you right now, I can go down the street to the local high school and throw one pitch on the mound. I could tell you it's not going to be pretty. And even the second one, even with your guidance, and even if you strap the all the devices on me, it's still a matter of repetition is the key, because that's where you turn things from the conscious to the subconscious, the unconscious, and that's where habits and automation exists. That's where the actual system is. And I think a lot of times that's a mistake that we make, is we all think that knowledge is power, but knowledge is maybe like the beginning of awareness, if anything, but it's not
Yeah.
really power, right? Because power is, it's almost like having a battery. Well, it's not really powerful if I'm not hooking it up to anything. It has potential power, but
Yeah.
it's interesting. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
how you highlighted that. So, as we wrap things up, any things that you think the future is going to bring that could increase the level of excitement that already exists for those people that are listening in right now for how they can use this technology? In other words, is there an improvement in technology? Are we starting to see it maybe reduce in price in the future so it can have more applications? Is there a new group that's used it in a unique way that you've been fascinated by? What does the future look like in your field?
Yeah, I think the future looks like I think biomechanics, motion capture is going to be more accessible and it's going to get into more hands. That being, it's going to be cheaper. And so I think that, yeah, we do have the gold standard, but I think there's a big push of just trying to get it out there for people to use themselves, whether it's a father just doing motion capture on his son, things like that, getting the education out there. What is biomechanics? What are we looking at? And like, why do we care about it? Just basic education about that, because the field is essentially kind of a lesser known field. And so I think that, what's in store for us, like I said, like getting it out in more hands and getting it more usable, and also just being more aware of what it is.
I love it. Yeah. Wow. So much amazing information jam packed into less than an hour. If anyone wants to interact with you, talk to you, try to offer you an extra $150,000 to leave the Mets and come work for them, how can they make that offer? Where would they go to find you?
Yeah, so I feel like my email is about to change. So I'll give you my Twitter handle. My Twitter handle is Hamer, my last name Hamer, and then time 15 at Twitter. I also have LinkedIn. You just search me with my name right as shown there.
Guys, this has been an amazing interview with Dr. Tyler Hamer. I am blown away. I want 500 grand. I have got new goals. I'm going to write down new SMART goals. I do think I'm going to have to increase my prices, unfortunately, to get to that $500,000 mark. But I can't thank you enough. And you know what? I love to give you a compliment. I love how you took something that is very technical and you broke it down so it was simple and easy to understand. And you also did it in a very time efficient and effective manner. So I have a feeling that your future is going to be extremely bright with the Mets because that efficiency, that accuracy, the background that you have both in sports and in biomechanics, I just think that you're a very unique gem that people are going to appreciate the heck of from a value standpoint. So really excited to witness what your future looks like.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate it. I really do.
All right. Well, take care, Tyler.
Thanks, Jay.